So for this last video, I'm going to show you how to put your parts that you've made so far together in an assembly. So you should see an assembly tab already at the bottom of your screen, and it's pretty empty right now. So we're going to start with inserting our base. So I can click that insert button and find my base, or it's going to be called whatever your tab is called. And I clicked on it once, and then now when I move my cursor over in this little graphics window, it moves around. So I'm just going to click once to place it. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to place one of each of the other pegs too. And click the check mark. So our base, we really don't want it to move around at all. We want it to be stationary, and we can make the other pieces move around. So I'm going to right click on it and choose fix. So that means I can't move it around. It's stuck in that spot, which will be helpful for what we're going to end up doing. So I'm going to show you in this video two different ways to mate objects. I'm going to use the slider and the fasten. So the slider will make the parts move up and down in these little holes, kind of like how they would be in the toy. The fasten kind of just sticks it in one spot and doesn't let it move. There's also revolute, which you'll learn about in a different project video. So we're going to start with this circle and putting it in the circle hole. So I'm going to choose the slider mate. And now it's basically asking me, like, what do I want to connect? So if I come over to my peg here, and I have it positioned at the top, it's hard to see, but there is little, when I zoom in, it doesn't help either, but there's a green line, a red line, and a blue line. Those are those different axes in our 3D world, X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to click it on the top within the blue is pointing up. And I'm right in that center of my circle. It kind of snapped to that point. So that's one spot that's going to get mated. And you always have to choose like two things, or else it doesn't know where you want it to be. So I'm going to come over to my hole, and if I hover over, it kind of snaps to that top again, and I have that blue line pointing up. So if I click that, it moved my piece right there. So I'm just going to click the check mark and close that, and close the slider. So now if I grab my blue piece, I can slide it up and down. So that one is a pretty easy one to get in there. So next, we're going to do your square peg, and what we want to actually slide is one of these edges of the square on one of the edges in the corner of the square peg hole. So I'm going to grab my slider mate again, and I'm going to click on one of these edges. I'm going to click on one of the edges at the top so that I'm right on a corner. My blue line is pointing up again because that kind of tells you the direction that it's going to slide. And I'm going to come over to one of my square corner holes, edges, and click that as well. So from there, I can slide it up and down. So I'll do that one more time because I know it's a little tricky and to see what I'm clicking. So I'm going to close, I'm going to delete slider 2 and move it out of the way. So with the slider, I am right on top, and this is actually a really good view here. So I'm on a corner, my blue is pointing up, and I was also on that top face was also kind of selected with all those dots and not a side, because then the blue is like pointing at me instead of pointing up. So then over here on my green piece, I'm on a corner, and again my blue is pointing up. So I kind of had to slide from the main green piece over to get it pointing up. If you're on the inside, if I'm like this on an edge, the blue is pointing towards me, and that's not going to work because then it's going to slide different ways. So kind of on this top surface on the corner and clicking that, and then it popped right over. So now I can slide that one as well. So getting those edges and lines and that little blue, green, red icon to match up is really important with getting those sliders to work how you want. So lastly, I'm going to show you how to use a mate connector with your triangle piece. This one is even trickier than the square to do the slider, so I figured I'd show you a different type of connector with this piece instead. So this one's not going to be able to move like our blue or like our circle and square pegs. It'll just kind of be stuck in place. So I am going to grab my fasten mate connector. And again, I have to choose what two things I want to kind of like glue together. Like where do I want the glue if I'm thinking about how I'm assembling this to stick. So I'm going to choose this flat side or like the bottom of my triangle. And you can see that the blue peg is like pointing at me. So that's one side. So that's like one surface I would glue if I was gluing this together and assembling it that way. And then just to make it easier, I don't think it matters which side in here you choose. I'm just going to do the one that I can kind of see right now. And I'm going to get that side selected. Again, that blue peg is kind of sticking out at me. And so if you kind of think about where these two are, which ones you're clicking on each of these two different parts, the blues are going to line up and go together. So when I click that spot, and close out. Nope. And that ended up in a weird spot. So sometimes it does that, so and I can't move it. So I'm going to, so I could delete it and start over, but I can just double click on it. And I know that second one isn't right. So I'm just going to move that up. I got rid of that second mate connector, and I'm going to try that again. So my first one is still selected. I can kind of see the ghost of it on there. And let's try that again. So if I come from the side, there we go. So I just did the other side so it doesn't have to rotate around at all. So you might just have to pick a different side of the hole for it to connect to. So I'll show you again what I did there. So because this side, if I were to stick this directly in that peg hole, it would actually line up with this one. I clicked on that center line and I went right in there and didn't get funky like the last time. So now we're going to bring in our hammer head and the hammer handle to assemble those together. So we're going to insert in our hammer head and our handle. All right, so we are just going to stick this rod in that hole. So we're going to use our fasten mate, and we want the top of our rod with that blue line pointing up to go into our hole in here. Yeah, so that looks good. So if for some reason your hammer isn't like the rod isn't going like into the actual head, it's just like on the surface of it, this little arrow flips it around. So now it's going all the way through. And we can see that it's like sticking up there. So now those are attached in there. You can click on your hammer head and like spin it around if you need to. So when you click on it, you get these controls that rotates things. So then you can make it visible for what you're doing. There's also the arrows to like move it around. So kind of like how we did in CoSpaces. And then there is our hammer and our peg toy.